Great. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So, yeah, stress. Wow, we talk about this topic with every athlete from basically the first call you ever have with us, where we go over your questionnaires and all of that. Um, we talk about that in your logs every day. I mean, it's kind of an ongoing thing, right? Because our mentality is, and our kind of cornerstone philosophy about training is like the body, it doesn't really know miles. It only really
Well,
knows the stress
it's
that you
not even a
put on your.
philosophy. It's like, hard science, like
Right.
demonstrated, like
Sure.
stress in your life can impact you physically in a lot of the same ways that challenging training can, right? And so you always need to take that into consideration that
Mm-hmm.
it's not just something we say because yes, mental health is like of utmost importance and yes, your happiness is of utmost importance. Thirdly, to lump in with that is that if you ignore stress management, your training will be less effective. So not only is that not good for your brain, it's not good for your body and it's not good for you as an athlete. So, not good for heart, soul or, all the rest of the person.
Exactly. Thank you, Zoe. You described that very well. So we've written a blog post about this a couple months back now, and I don't know if you guys have seen that, but just it's pretty common. I think we're all familiar with what stress feels like or how that manifests. Um, but generally speaking, if we're in a stressed situation, our heart rates kind of go up. We might get a little sweaty. We might feel a little anxious. All of the symptoms, whether they're mental or physical, are generally this thing that happens when your body starts to release cortisol, which is a hormone. And that's your response to the stress that you're feeling. So, stress can come. Why does stress come? Environmental factors. It can come from the demands of the workout you're doing. It can come from a fight with a coworker, a disagreement about work, a fight with a loved one. There are many, areas in which we all get stress. And the important thing is being able to recognize kind of when we're in those stressful situations, right? So we think about kind of the physical symptoms of it, shortness of breath, elevated heart rate. Um, Maybe sometimes, at least for me, I feel like I'm not as patient with people when I'm a little bit more stressed. Like my bandwidth is gone. I sort of feel taxed. Like everybody has kind of an individual, if you,
Actually, anger management and inability to control mood swings can be symptomatic of stress.
okay.
And it's not always just going to show up as feeling I am stressed. In a lot of people, it'll actually manifest in just a more variable mood than normal. So shorter temper, maybe you're more
Mm-hmm.
likely to feel sad. You've just it can be a lot of things, but it's not always just oh, I feel stressed and feel anxious. Stress and anxiety can manifest in a different set of feelings and emotions in a lot of people.
Right, which is what we were just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So think about, maybe the ways that you might manifest stress. I guess is the point of that. Because for each person it can be really individual. And then, we have to figure out how do we react to that? Like, how do we manage those feelings and those thoughts that we have, right? Because it's vital because of what Zoe mentioned before. Like, if you're really stressed, you go into a workout, you're not going to get as much out of the workout. Also, the workout causes some stress too. And even though that stress is good, like we're trying to create that stress in order for you to adapt and to get better. Um, Also, sometimes it could be too much. So being able to recognize those signs is helpful.
And I think that's an important thing to touch on is that we're not talking about removing all stress from your life
Right.
because the thought of trying to remove all stress from my life totally stresses me out because it's just not going to be that's just it's not going to happen. Thinking about that makes me more anxious than just moving towards a place where I can accept that there will always be stress and that I will be always getting better at managing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly, if you think about it in that framework, that's what training is, right? Training is stress managed in a way that makes sense for your life. So you have to you know, ebb and flow. You can't handle everything all the time. You know, like even in training, like we understand that in order to grow, we need to add stress and we need to intentionally cause breakdown. However, in life, we don't, you know, ever want to get to the point where you intentionally cause breakdown, but we do recognize that for people to grow in relationships, careers, whatever it is, you will need to encounter stress, and stress has some positive sides, right? Like stress can really motivate us to do better, can motivate us to learn things, it can motivate us to meet deadlines. There are some productive sides of stress. It's not an inherently negative thing. And I think moving towards a more nuanced understanding of stress both in training and in life can help us accept it better, which helps me in my stress management practice.
Absolutely. I think, it depends on the person too. Like Zoe, and it's so individual. Zoe like thrives under pressure
High
and
stress.
high stress situations. She, really does well with that. It gives her a lot of drive. But also, there's a tipping point, right? Where the balance is thrown off, where you're not getting as much from that stress and you start to, maybe
Develop
get some
a
of those.
debilitating hip injury.
Sure, anything, it could manifest in injury, or you get into a fight with your partner, or you're unable to like perform the way you want to at work. So like having the ability to recognize that stuff and to know also like the way that the stress is distributed around the different like facets of your life, it really makes a difference. So when we're talking about like training specifically, there's a reason why we run like 5 days a week instead of do 2 or 3 runs a week. And so like to talk about like the good parts of stress, your 3 days of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday runs, they're supposed to be less stressful because you're doing 3, back-to-back runs. Wednesday tends to be the most stressful of those 3 days because you ease into the week, and then Thursday you kind of recover from the workout on Wednesday. So there's a reason the stress is distributed that way. There's a reason why Saturday has a little bit more stress concentration than Sunday, but it's still in total not more than 20% maybe of the entire week's worth of stress, right? Because if we concentrate too much stress at once, it can be too acute, and you
Right.
can, succumb to those
Which is like
stresses.
why, there's, and this is like to break it down just in the most obvious way possible, there's a difference between going out and running a 50-mile week and going out and running a 50-miler, right? Like your
Mm-hmm.
body would feel those things totally differently because, like, the way that stress is allocated changes how your body responds to the stress.
Exactly. Yeah, so perfectly said. Gosh, that was so good that I lost my train of thought on that. But yeah, and so the point of all of this is basically to let you know that yes, stress is good and it's going to help you adapt, but at
To a point.
to a point. And that point is kind of where we like to look at it as like a stress bucket,
Or
where
I like it like a pizza or
you
a
like a
pie,
pizza?
a stress
You're
pizza,
obsessed with pizza. All
right?
right,
You have like a finite amount of bandwidth, right?
exactly.
And maybe it's going to like grow or shrink with time, but you have like your training stress and your life stress, to just like really oversimplify things, right? Like I have my running life and I have my life. And like, let's say for me, when I have a week where I'm producing a podcast, I literally have to run less and run less hard in that week, because since I can't diminish the stress that producing a podcast puts on me and I can control training stress, that's the piece of the pie that I shrink as the inevitable life stress pie grows. And, that can be other things. Like it can be career things. Like if whenever I have athletes move, I'm like, let's just do 2 weeks of like chilling off the watch, jog if you want,
Mm-hmm.
because things like moving can be incredibly stressful for people. And you're just not going to, if you're moving all day, you're not going to super duper enjoy training, and you're not going to get a lot out of it if you're tired or just mentally you feel like your brain is on fire, because moving is hard.
Yeah.
So it's like there are some things that we can control. Like I probably wouldn't recommend people, intentionally take on life stress right before a race, right? Like given the choice, I wouldn't say, hey, definitely make sure you like try to pitch your boss on something super ambitious the day before your ultra and get like super invested in that. So like if you can control it, that's one way you can kind of like manage your pieces of the pie. However, and this is the part where we come in as coaches, and I would love to hear TJ's perspective on this. Like we're your allies in this stress management journey, and we can be the ones that help you, like when the life part of the pizza starts to overtake the training part of the stress pizza. We're your partners in figuring out how to manage the training part of that stress pizza. So I'd love to know what you like to do with runners who are going through times of high stress. Like, what do you intentionally do? How do you alter their training load? And how do you work with them to, like, what other physical stress management techniques do you work with them on?
Well, I think first of all, you describe it really well. I mean, for most people and for the majority of the athletes that we're coaching, like we're all working at, 9 to 5. Some people are working more, and some people have even more challenging schedules of that. Like I think about our nurses and some of our doctors and things like that we're coaching, where the schedule really varies. So like it's hard to always see patterns in when the stresses are going to come up. So like, as a coach, you rely a lot on what the athlete tells you, those kind of variable points that they put in, and it's a bit anecdotal, but it's really, really important. And so I kind of take those points and I'm like, all right, this athlete is, kind of telling me their feedback is that like life is a bit stressful right now, or things are challenging. And kind of in the same way, Zoe, that like work through this stuff yourself and you're like, okay, I'm having a podcast week, so I'm not going to do my doubles, or I'm going to, run the lower end of my prescribed volume and things like that. Those are definitely things that I do with my athletes. I think the first thing that I usually do is have athletes either reduce or remove some time at intensity, because that's very acute stress. So we can remove that and allow
Intensity
you.
being strides and hills and workouts, right?
Correct. That's time at intensity.
Yeah.
Anytime that you're not running easy effort, above aerobic threshold basically is time at intensity. So it's like moderate and above. So not your normal, your normal running. And so like taking that out of the equation, the time at intensity, so your intervals, your hill strides, your workout, or reducing that. It depends on like the level of stress the athlete has, right? So it's really individual. And often I ask a lot of questions about that in order to kind of obtain a good picture of the situation, because you don't want to reduce too much. If you reduce a ton, the athlete might miss out on some of that good stress that they need. So hopefully you try to strike a balance and make a good call on how much to reduce. But like the obvious thing is taking away that acute stress, because like running hard when you're really stressed is even more stressful. I mean, if your bucket is close to being full stress wise, or your pizza is close to being, completely filled up with stress toppings, or I'm not sure how you do your thing, but it can be really tough, and you wouldn't be getting any benefit to that training to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So we can remove that, and helps create some bandwidth. A lot of times also I find like athletes who are dealing with like a move or a lot of stress at work or something, it's helpful to not have to just to take it visually out of the log. Sometimes can be really helpful. It makes the idea of going and running and training more digestible, because often some people, when they get stressed or they have a big life event, they think I have to quit running. I have to remove everything. And that's not always the case. Most of the time, actually, just some small changes are really helpful, like psychologically. But of course, like there's always, somebody who's moving, or like more drastic things that we've dealt with over the last couple of years. You can move from, reducing overall volume. And I think I don't really go by like percentages necessarily, but I start kind of with an overall view once I've got an idea of what I'm dealing with the athlete. And also if it becomes a trend, we really want to be careful. So I might kind of trend multiple weeks and make them reduced in terms of volume. Because if you're too stressed when you go out and run, it's going to be a little counterproductive, right? And it could provoke an injury, especially mental, emotional stress. We kind of see that from time to time too, where like someone who's really taxed or um, doesn't have a lot of bandwidth mentally and emotionally because of other things going on in their life, it really serves them to take away, not to take away, but to reduce so you can stay consistent. And being consistent, even if it's like if you're doing 3 to 5 miles and we reduce that to 2 to 4, that's actually a pretty significant reduction if you think about how much time it takes to run that additional 2 miles. Um, so, when you're reducing that, it gives that person some time back in their schedule as well. So things overall seem a little less overwhelming, I think, because when it comes down to this stuff, sometimes time management and feeling like you have enough time to get out there can be a big challenge.
And on a similar note, when I have athletes that are really strapped for time, like I have athletes that are like nurses that are on call and they'll just like jog around the parking lot, or like they'll make sure they stay within like a half-mile radius of their hospital so that if they get called in, that they're right there. And one thing that we always really work on is making sure that you don't say, okay, I have a 45-minute lunch break. I'm going to run as hard as I can for absolutely all of that lunch break to get the maximum mileage in as possible, because that undermines the intention of the workout. It would do that in a completely healthy, stress-free athlete, but it definitely does that in someone who already has elevated cortisol levels, just because you're just going to be flooding yourself with all this counterproductive stress hormone that is absolutely not going to help you develop, that doesn't help your aerobic base at all.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like studying for a test, like practicing taking a test really poorly, right? Like if you're always running, in the absence of sufficient oxygen and in the presence of excessive cortisol, that's really hard on your body. Like, not only are you not going to progress, but it's definitely going to be a very short, quick, efficient road to, burnout, injury, something, along those lines. And so I always work with athletes who feel really short for time on making sure that, like, okay, if you only have half an hour, we're still going to chill for that half hour, because that will help you advance as an athlete and as a human a lot more than trying to do like a 5K time trial on your lunch break will.
Yeah. And believe me, we've had people do that, and it's kind of sometimes normal when you're not feeling good. It's normal to want to power through and to try to like force the other side of that. And we've talked about this kind of in previous calls where, like, sometimes if you're not feeling great and you're not motivated or you're feeling a little burned out, you need to like manufacture those feelings. Like, you don't wait to feel motivated to go do your run. You go do your run anyways in the hopes that you'll feel better sense of accomplishment or overall well-being afterwards as a result of doing the run, and that a day or 2 or 3 later the motivation may return because you stuck to your schedule, you stayed in line with the goals that you had for yourself, and you're working towards your long-term potential. And sometimes there are those moments where it is important to like pump the brakes, so to speak, where an athlete takes an extra rest day, can be really helpful. Or even when an athlete just takes a couple extra rest days. For me, a number of ways to help people is just, how are you dealing on a day-to-day basis with the stress? And I like to point people towards meditation. We wrote a great blog about how to utilize it, breath work and things like that, where kind of in the moment can be very effective at kind of lowering your heart rate and getting, out of that sympathetic nervous system fight or flight response that you may be having to, a heavy stress situation.
Can I interject just for a sec?
Oh, yeah.
So Matt is asking a question on the physical side. Other than balancing stress, how does cortisol go away? Doing nothing, meditation, massages, eating, etc. There's actually a lot of really good content in that question itself, because there are some things there that can help. It doesn't like eliminate cortisol, but it helps mitigate the release of cortisol. Because like once you release it, it's kind of just there and it does dissipate. But that's like one reason that rest days are super important, is because your hormonal system is given time and space to re-regulate things like cortisol, which is produced from exercise and from, work and things. So
Hmm.
like you're never gonna not have any cortisol, but like, it gets released during exercise because that helps you burn energy more efficiently, basically. So it's like not a bad thing. Like you do need it in some amounts, but taking time away from exercise helps regulate it. Meditation has been shown to regulate it. If you're not eating enough, like if you're running in an energy deficiency, you will be releasing more of it. So that's another reason we really work with athletes on eating enough food, because if you're not eating enough, your body will be low grade stressed all the time. So you're just like, you're trying to wedge more, into that pizza pie when there's just no space if you're
Yeah.
not fueling yourself effectively. And that's one thing we really want people to be aware of. Sleep helps with this. If you're getting sufficient sleep, that helps clear your body of cortisol. If you're getting not enough sleep, that releases cortisol. And so I think I would love to hear TJ, because this is something he has a little bit more experience in, talk about what the physical presentation of stress is. Like you were talking about raised heart rate and how we can manage that in ourselves, like how we can kind of take control from our sympathetic nervous system, which, like, a lot of the times, I know I'm kind of a bundle of fight or flight responses throughout my day, but there are ways to kind of, take the steering wheel back from those evolutionary responses that are, once again, like the reason that we've been successful as a species, right? Like I'm
Hmm.
super glad that back in the day my bird brain would have been probably very able to evade a saber-toothed tiger, but it also like totally freaks out every time it like gets on Twitter. So it's like finding that balance.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about balance, so that's obviously the most. I think, at least for me, that's where I look at this stuff. That's kind of the lens I'm looking at stress through. It's like it's not that stress doesn't exist or that you don't need it. It's just how do we balance it? How do we utilize it? And one of the things that it's really interesting, that Matt kind of touches on is like that physical side. And does the cortisol go away? Well, it's not really that the cortisol goes away, right? Your body produces it. It's natural and normal based on the things that you experience and the environmental stressors that you are encountering, which cause the stress reactions. But the number one way to balance this stuff is to sleep well. So sleeping is your biggest tool for balancing your hormonal system. So that is something that I, will ask athletes to consider. How are you sleeping? Well, I'm sleeping 6 hours. Okay, well, science really tells us that you have to hit that 7 hour marker. And kind of what we see for athletes who are training, that 8 or even 10 hours a week number and above, is you really need to push that 8 plus, 8, 9, maybe 10, depending. So if you're not getting your sleep, you're not regulating your hormonal system. So the cortisol doesn't really go away. The levels balance out. And another way to do that, and when you're starting to kind of feel the physical symptoms of like a stress situation, um, and I'll tie this back into what Sarah mentions because I think it's super important. When you use the training log and you kind of constantly are introspecting about like how you feel on a specific day, you're starting to build your awareness around how things in your life impact your training. But I mean, in broader terms, you're really learning how to like be aware of how environmental stress impacts you. So by writing that stuff in the log, you're giving yourself a chance. You're starting to reinforce those ideas so you can become more aware of them as they present themselves. Um, this is like one of the biggest reasons why we have a column in the training log so you can listen to your body feedback and get really good at responding to it. And one of the ways that I like to have athletes respond to this acute stress, if you feel it during the day, your heart rate is climbing, or you're starting to feel like maybe like some tightness or shortness of breath, that anxious feeling where you're like, I'm trying to catch my breath, but it's not happening. It's individual. So you guys who know it, you might kind of know how that feels for you. So I'm kind of just describing how it feels for me. Um, You can think about some deep breathing exercises to do, or short visualizations that help kind of create the space you need to calm the system down. Because when your breath is elevated and you're breathing really rapidly, you're not getting much oxygen to your brain. Everything becomes a little bit more confused. Um, so one of the things that I steer athletes to is 4-7-8 breathing, where you take a 4-second inhalation of air through your mouth, um, or your nose. It depends on how you like to do it. I'll probably go through my nose and out my mouth because it's more of a circular yoga breath. And I find that that is a little bit more relaxing to me, but I have met a few people who just won't breathe through their nose, for whatever reason. So do what works for you. But 4 seconds in, preferably through the nose, and hold it for 7 seconds and count. Because when you count 4 seconds in as you breathe, the act of counting keeps you from thinking about that thing that was stressing you. So it brings your mind more into that present moment, into that breath. Hold for 7 seconds, you're counting, and then exhale for 8, and really try to get all the air out. And when I make my exhalation, I try to visualize exhaling out that event that stressed me out or that thing that elevated me. And I'll do that for 4 cycles. So it's basically 4 breaths. It's very quick. It's like less than a minute. Um, but it really does help to kind of bring you back, get your feet back on the ground, to feel a little bit more grounded. So that way you can like, okay, now I can kind of deal with this situation, or I can, from a better place, I can think about how to move forward. Like, oh, should I do 5 miles? Well, maybe I should just do 3 today. But maybe if you didn't take a minute to calm yourself and you just went right out the door, you'd not only do 5, but you'd hammer 5 miles instead, which might be counterproductive considering, if you had a very stressful day. Sometimes running easier, and we talk about this a lot, like your easy effort, it's like 4 to 6 out of 10 on an effort scale.
And it's going to change when you're stressed also.
Yeah,
like I know
totally.
for me, like if I didn't sleep well, feeling stressed, feeling pressure at work, I really remove any attachment to a certain speed from, because like it's so easy to be like, man, I do this loop like 4 times a week. Why am I so slow today? And it's like, oh yeah, I didn't sleep so great and work is hard. And like that's just going to affect my running, and it's totally fine. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to be slow forever because I had a stressful day and missed a good night of sleep. It just means that you're like, you have to kind of adjust your expectations. You should be always grading yourself on a curve.
Yeah, Meg mentions hugs, snuggles, petting doggies and kittens.
And I think
If you have access to those things, yes. I mean, that stuff really does work. We know for like hugging is great.
Like hugs.
Yeah, it really works. Smiling helps. Things that generally take you back into the present moment.
And they just like help you re-regulate your sympathetic nervous system, right? Like I think it's easy to like get abstract and be like, yay, hugs make me feel good. But like touching another human like actually like does provoke complicated release of, chemicals, and being near another person who has a good breathing pattern can help you re-regulate your own breathing pattern, which controls your heart rate, which will control how much cortisol you're releasing and how you are experiencing a stressful moment. So like these really small, like breathing exercises, like to my very weird skeptical brain, I'm like, that's so hippy dippy, I hate it, I'm not going to try it. And then I remind myself that like these things will help you bring your heart rate back under control. Like these things have a specific intentional purpose. And if you fully commit and engage with them, then you will be able to re-regulate something that has become dysregulated.
Yeah. And I think you say it well. I tend towards the hippy dippy side of things.
We have a crystal in our house.
Yeah. And anyways, I think, you guys might want to try these things. You don't have to count when you do yoga breaths, but I recommend it because it helps you stay more present. That's the entire purpose behind the counting. If you just breathe in and out, you can easily think about something else, which would not be the purpose of that. You really want to be present and try to just get your feet back on the ground. Um,
What about running for stress reduction?
I I think it kind of depends on the athlete. A lot of people really are dependent on running as stress reduction. I think running can be a tool to help you reduce stress, but it depends on maybe how much stress you have going into that run, and then the way in which you're actually running, right? So you mentioned like you run really easy. That's what I got out of what you said before. Like when you've had a big stress day working on the podcast, you've done 10 hours of nonstop editing, and you're like, okay, I have to go do this workout. And then you pump the brakes and you're like, all right, what does easy feel like? It's not a number. It's not a percentage of my, VO2 max or my aerobic capacity. It's like, what does easy feel like? Easy is effortless, smooth strides, 4 sentences,
For
conversational.
me, it's like I try to find an effort level that is like so unmistakably easy.
Yeah.
Like to where the question where I was like, if am I running easy enough? Like would be so far. Like I'm just so far on the other side of the fence
Are
of
you
that where I'm
breathing
just
hard?
like,
What
oh,
is your
not at
breath
all.
like?
I mean, super easy. Like fully, like could leave a non-embarrassing voicemail.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, the point is to become more aware of your breath, right? That's another reason why we don't, love to prescribe like run at 7:30 pace. That's your easy effort. No, your easy effort is linked to your breath. Your breath is a huge indicator of your perceived effort.
Right,
So
which like if you look at thing like measurement of stress and recovery being the other side, like less stress. I don't want to say the opposite of stress, but like here you have stress load and here you have recovery, right? A
mhm.
measurement of how much you are veering towards the recovery side of those things is heart rate variability, right?
Yeah.
So like is your heart rate able to like really get up there if you're pushing it, and then like when you're just chilling at home on the couch, like is it low? And if you're stressed, it's not going to be that low, so your variability is going to get a lot narrower. So that would make sense that like on days that you're stressed and trying to run, you're not going to have as big of a like, spectrum of like, this feels easy, this feels moderate, this feels hard. Things are going to feel a little bit harder because your baseline is just going to be different
Yeah.
on days that you are stressed. Your heart rate variability is altered and you're starting from a different place than normal. So you just
Hmm.
have to like really, really cut yourself a ton of slack and like don't go out and try to PR your 5K or like do a tempo run or like set a neighborhood FKT if you're like, you know,
So as if you want to call it stress relief, I think you can, but it depends on the state in which you enter that run. If you're really stressed,
I
you're
would say if you're
probably
having like physiological symptoms, like
Mhm.
extremely reduced heart rate variability, I would say if you're like at the point where you're maybe engaging in breath work, like if you're having some like low ambient stress, like, oh man, it's 2020, I'm going to go run to kind of process some of that. Like that to me makes sense. Where I get concerned about athletes is when their only tool to cope with stress is exercise and they start to become reliant on it as
Mhm.
their one way, right?
Mhm.
Like if someone was like, "Oh, I could run about it or I could journal about it." I'd be like, "Yeah, maybe you're fine to run." But if someone to me was like, "The only way I have of coping with how I feel right now is to exercise," I would say we really need to examine this because I think that is not great from a mental health standpoint, and also you're just whether or not you feel like a run is relieving you of stress, your body is going to have a totally different take on that when you're just dumping cortisol into your blood veins, right? Like you can say I feel better all you want, your body's going to be like, yeah, well, I just had like a double shot of cortisol, so
Well, also, you get a lot of dopamine from going on a run, so you might initially feel better from going out and running hard when you're stressed, but later the kind
I mean
of
it
the
builds up,
consequences of that.
it compounds.
Exactly. So it is very compounding. So, when you're thinking about the state that you're in when you go out and run, ask yourself, like, how stressed am I? And try to respond to that. Over time, you get better at that. You get maybe to a level where, you're like as good as Zoe, where you just, okay, I'm really stressed, but I know how to go really easy. If that's 11-minute pace today, well, I'm going to do that. And I don't care that that's the pace, even though yesterday I ran at 8-minute pace. The pace is irrelevant. What matters is the effort. Um, and I think you do make a really good point, Zoe. So I want to reiterate that if running is your only tool for stress management, but your stress bucket is full, the run isn't going to be a successful way to manage that stress. So you have to think about you have to make the hard choice, which for, athletes who have a lot of goals and want to achieve, the hard choice is to say, I'm going to rest today, or I'm going to run really easy, or I'm going to walk just to stay active. That's a hard choice for a lot of people. That's why we're here, because we really want you guys to feel supported in making a tough choice like that. I know with a lot of the athletes I work with, it's not second nature to say no to that run. Like, what you want to do is yes,
Oh, yeah. I mean, the
and
reason
it's
that,
important to just try to let go of that, but give yourself grace in that process. It takes time to get to the place where Zoe feels really comfortable saying no to a workout or going easy. That takes, years of kind of trying to respond correctly or getting supported in responding that way. So, if you ever have a question, that would be a moment where you would text us or you would write in the log, hey, I'm feeling pretty stressed this morning. I'm not sure if I'm going to make my afternoon run. What do you think? And then we are able to give you guys some feedback on that to kind of help you with your decision making, and to stay accountable to that. Because I know, like, for a lot of people, it does feel really good to go and do that workout, especially if you've had a hard day at work. You can become very reliant on the workout and the dopamine that you get from that workout. And there are moments where it's very important to remove yourself from the workout. Not for most people, that's only a few times a year. But depending on, some of the athletes we coach have like incredibly high stress jobs, and it tends that sometimes those people are really good at making those decisions automatically because they've been in that position for a long time. But sometimes when we see athletes change jobs and are moving ahead in their careers and things like that and have unexpected stresses that they weren't accustomed to or weren't able to recognize in the same way as they were able to recognize other stresses, it's important that they kind of communicate with us, and then we're able to give that feedback back, to listen and respond. And to, I'll reiterate it again, this is why we try to have open lines of communication, as best as humanly possible. That way you guys feel supported in making those choices.
yeah, I think another thing that I just really want to emphasize with this is that, like, the fact that you have stress in your life is not going to, when managed appropriately, is not going to limit your athletic potential, right? And by that, I don't mean that you can take on everything that you ever thought and like there'll be no issues ever. Like, you do still have to say no to things, set intelligent boundaries for yourself. But like, I think it's so tempting to compare yourself. Like, I'll see other people on Strava and I'll be like, man, why isn't my training like theirs? Or like, man, I wish I, had more time to train, or like, man, I wish I could just do more and more and more. When for me, doing less is just as effective training, right? Like, I can achieve similar results to people who just have different life scenarios because I've adapted my training to fit my own life scenario,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, the best training for you is the best training for you. If there was any one just like best training, right? Like, if we could all just run 50 miles a week, no problem, no stress forever, like we would, that would be terrible for our business plan. But it would, that we would all just be doing that, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to adjust. You have to make sure that your training fits for your life, and understand that that's not like something that should, like, don't feel like you're being held back by that. There are, some exceptions. Like, if you're someone who struggles with chronic stress, you should want to address that, not because of you not achieving your athletic potential, but you're going to be limiting your human potential, and like mental health at that point is obviously the biggest concern. So like, once you've addressed, those aspects, don't worry about like having a stressful life. Like, you can still be a really badass athlete even if you have, like a family and a job and a lot
Mm-hmm.
going on. Like, people who, people like, man, parents are just such masters of this, and they do so amazing in life and in training because they know how to problem solve. And people who like TJ and I don't have those same problem solving
Mm-mm.
skills, right? Parents are amazing problem solvers and they know how to schedule and fit things in. Like if you've ever seen the like race plan for like a mom's race plan, so good. Like that is, that is epic. Like, like scheduling, problem solving, like those, like moms know how to manage time, right?
Yeah.
So, like the fact that you're a busy person who encounters stress can be a superpower if you know how to address it correctly
And manage it.
and manage it.
Yeah.
You don't, we should not all be striving to live perfect, stress free lives. We should be striving to do the best we can with what we have right now and grow in the process.
Yeah. Well, I think while managing it and keeping it in balance so you can achieve the things that you want to achieve. Because, like you mentioned, if it's out of balance, it's hard to pursue challenging things and things that kind of give you those feelings of satisfaction and attainment and all of that you get from like putting a goal out there and going for it. A lot of success has to do with just managing all of the situations that occur along the journey to getting to that point. Um, we've had some comments here. I was just gonna check. Yeah, another. So I mentioned 4-7-8 breathing, and Simon he mentions like square breathing, which is a visualization technique where each breath creates a side of a square, and you can visualize it. It's a very good method, actually. I like that one too. And then Artyom, he likes running and lifting for stress relief, but he also, I like this because it really balances that out. A nice hike in the woods can be really good stress relief too. And I would definitely agree. And depending on the degree of stress that you have in that particular day or during a week, one might be more appropriate than the other. And then, Sarah, what does she mention here?
Feeling her feelings. I think
Yes,
that that's so important. And
totally.
Sarah is just like a master of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
But like not avoiding how you feel, right? Like if you're going through something, be honest about that with both yourself and your coach, and we will support you and love you unconditionally. And don't, like, once again, don't shy away from stress. Don't shy away for feelings when you feel them. Sarah mentions like sitting with things and not avoiding them. And I think that is so, so important, like, especially in a culture that doesn't always validate the fact that feelings are a normal part of being a person, particularly in endurance sports, right? Like,
Hmm.
there's definitely a lot of messaging around, like, oh, stuff your feelings down, like, tough, but I mean, some of the best athletes out there are people who just know how to rock their feelings. You can be a tough person who is also very emotionally intelligent. Those are not two different things, they are very much the same thing. And like shying away from how you feel has never once led to a more well-rounded and productive training cycle.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that kind of fits in really well with this stuff, right? Like, so a way to sit with your feelings and to kind of think about addressing them is to spend a couple extra moments when you are articulating how you felt about your workout and how your day went in the log. That can be a really good space for that. And it's a reason why we have that space because it is important to think about those things. The more aware you are of all of this stuff, the better able you are to manage it and to navigate the stresses that you just encounter on a day-to-day basis. It's not about like, living in a cabin in the woods and never having a stress in your life. It's about being able to utilize the stress when you need to, back off in response when things are kind of, 10 out of 10, and to use the moments to your advantage. So, I really feel like that's a really important part of it, just sitting with it and not being afraid to say, I'm really stressed right now. And
Or whatever it is you're
yeah,
feeling.
I mean, it doesn't have to be stress, right? Feelings are not just limited to that. And then Jason, what's he saying?
How our response to
Yeah,
stress is determined by our relationship to it. That's super interesting. I'd love to
definitely.
know. I feel like that's something you know more about than I do, like from your
Well,
training
I would,
specifically.
yeah, I mean, but I think it actually ties in really well to what we've, been talking about here. And what I see and understand from this is that like it's your perspective or the way that you're viewing your reality in that moment is whether or not that stress is going to be powerful and helping you move forward to achieve your goals, to be a better runner, to be a better person, partner, to do well at your in your business, etc. Or if you feel like that stress is setting you back, if it's too overwhelming in those things. It is a matter of your, I believe, your perspective and how you view it, what you how you associate that stress with the event that's going on and any other kind of factors that play into that. I think a lot of that can have to do with your kind of your prejudices and things that you have determined for yourself along your journey that are either positive or negative. So perspective in all of this, that's something that like I always work on. Zoe always reminds me, I'm like, I don't want stress.
I'm really good at
No.
stress.
And Zoe's like, stress,
Well, I'm not
yes.
good at it, but like
You
I have
thrive, you
it.
thrive under stress,
Occasionally,
and
yeah.
I
I mean,
strive under a
we're
relaxed
kind of like
state.
we're at different ends of the stress spectrum. TJ owns a crystal. I love stress, you know?
Right.
But like how do we like, how do I try to do better like you and manage it in the way that you manage it? How do you, like me, understand that it can be productive and like embrace it in ways without shying away
Oh, I
from it?
think it's an openness and understanding that there's more. Stress is just stress. It's how you view it. It's how you associate it based on a number of different factors that exist in your reality. Um, you know, that's what it is. I mean, honestly, when you think about, and maybe this is too philosophical or whatever, but if you think about your reality, like I'm experiencing my reality and how I am interpreting things that are going on right now are based on just my past experiences. So if I have associations to certain stresses that I feel are negative, I'm not going to get as much out of that situation. That is going to be more adverse to me than it would be positive.
I
So
really
that's
love,
that's how I
yeah,
that's how I view that.
yeah, and I guess I really love Chrissy's question because I feel like this is something that we've definitely addressed in our own like work life running partner relationship. Just like the dynamic of like you being a man and me being a woman. Like when we run together, there are different ways that like stress will play out, and that like if we're running at the same pace, that typically means you're running far below what you're capable of. Typically means I'm running much closer to like the speed on the trail that I'm capable of, right? Like our meeting in the middle
Mhm.
is going to be typically like we try to do it in a way that feels comfortable and good for me. But like I'll sometimes kind of ease out of that. And that's something I always have to be like really honest and vulnerable about to be like, hey, TJ, I'm kind of like, maybe I'll see you at the top of this hill, or like we'll have to, either slow it down or I'll see you down the trail, and like having those honest conversations. And I know I've, had my fair share of incidents on runs where I haven't, where I've definitely veered out of the bubbly side of my
Mm-hmm.
personality. And I think that just taking things that have helped with that are just trying to be honest before something like explodes, right? Like if you're starting to feel a little bit stressed and you're starting to feel pressure, whether it's like from like maybe you're not feeling as prepared as you could be, like if it's environmental, if you're hot, you're cold, like all these things, like just trying to communicate honestly about them. And I know that sometimes people feel reluctant to do that because they think they're complaining, but I think that when you really kind of establish solid um, like adventure partnerships, you're just able to more effectively be like, hey, so what I'm feeling right now is that I'm cold, and that's kind of adding to my stress bucket.
So
Um,
what
yeah.
I'll just kind of interject here. I think having a comfort level with communication is kind of the most important thing here, right? So like before the run, communicating your expectations of the run. That's something that Zoe and I do. We run a lot together. I do a lot most of my long runs with Zoe. Um, and so communicating kind of the goals for the day are really important. Like, hey Zoe, like we're doing this loop Like, are you prepared for like 4 hours? It's going to be, like a time on feet kind of day. We don't have to go hard, but we're going to be out there. Are you mentally ready for that? Okay, and she'll check in with me. And if she's not ready, we'll adjust the run and do something else. And, or maybe we'll run separately, or we'll start at the same trailhead and meet at a point along the way and run part of it together. Communicating that is what helps us to avoid, like some kind of breakdown out there or miscommunication. So I think, like first and foremost, establishing the expectation for the run, communicating that, very, very, very important. And then checking in along the way. If somebody's doing, my view is that you're only as good as, probably the weaker of the runners. And not to say that Zoe is a weaker runner than me. Zoe just doesn't run at the same pace as me. So I have to assume that I will run at her effort level every time I go with her.
And this is like a continuing conversation we have, is that like, okay, if we're doing this together, we're going Zoe's pace, because while it doesn't typically, I mean, with some exceptions, while it doesn't negatively affect TJ's training to slow down, it would be detrimental to my training to force it and go above aerobic threshold. So we always have that conversation. It's very helpful that he understands the physiology and I don't have to give him an explainer on that. Like, with certain other running partners, I'll be like, hey, just so that you're prepared, this is the effort level that I plan on doing this adventure at. And if that's not cool with you, then, maybe we need to find something else.
I get a lot of questions. I don't know about you, Zoe, but for my athletes who love to run with other people, and some people do it well and they know how to communicate. This is my prescribed mileage and the workout I'm doing. And you can do that with me if you want. We'll run easy when we're running easy, and I'm going to do my workout because that's my prescribed time that my coach individualizes for me so that I can, improve over time, reiterating that and owning that rather than defaulting to your friend who doesn't have a coach and is just running their one run a week. Always default to your plan. Be proud of the fact that you are working hard to achieve your goals. Own it.
Set boundaries and expectations.
Exactly. And run easy. When it's easy, and Zoe are on an easy run, that is a conversational effort. If we're not chatting, normally somebody's like, it's normally me, something's wrong. Well, so like, because I'm not as chatty as Zoe. But like, the number one rule is like, if you're gonna run with somebody, you're running to have conversation with them. Most of the time, you're running to enjoy the partnership of being out there with a running partner. Keep it easy. If it's not easy, someone's not chatting. The other, because they can't catch their breath, and it's no fun anyways. So that's, if the expectation is to be social, it's got to be easy, and so you default to the runner who is, a little less strong or whatever it is in that case. There is a whole other aspect to that where I have a few athletes who want to run with faster runners on their days where they do workouts.
Yeah. And I think you can have a positive attitude without being bubbly. TJ's extremely positive, and I would never describe him as being bubbly. No. And, I think it's just like understanding that you don't have to put on a front or a face, and that honest and vulnerable communication with your partners is always the best thing.
Yeah.
Right. If you're not having a good time, and like something's like wrong, like maybe you have an actual need that's not being met, you should absolutely not be like, being bubbly to conceal that. I know particularly as a woman who adventures frequently with men, I'll fall into a habit of trying to like suck it up and not be the person who's like, actually, this is a little further than I wanted to go or was expecting. Like there's a lot of pressure on certain dynamics to maybe not own how you're feeling. And, as I've matured as an athlete and adventurer, I've gotten a lot better about telling people, just like honestly communicating how I'm feeling and knowing that that's okay. And that doesn't make me a lesser athlete or adventurer. And just owning it, right? Because like the only people I want to take out as partners are people that I know are going to communicate clearly, concisely, honestly, and
respect your communication,
and are going to respect me as well.
Yeah.
And Sarah, once again has some really awesome advice about like, just like addressing those things, like stopping, taking deep breaths, reframing the situation, eating and thinking positive. And, maybe a conversation for one of the next full hours can be how to best manage like running partners, running partnerships, talking, communicating with non-running partners, and managing some of those relationship dynamics. Because that's
Mm-hmm.
something that we see in the logs very frequently.
Yeah. Well, awesome. I guess just to summarize a little bit about the conversation, just very quickly to wrap things up, um,
Stress is good.
stress can be great. Stress can help you succeed. It can help you adapt to the training. But when our stress buckets, I'm using the bucket because it's easier for me. When our bucket fills up and is overflowing, it's very hard to get as much out of the training. So we want to be careful about those situations. We're going to try to learn to recognize some of the physical, mental, and emotional manifestations of stress so that we can kind of interpret and better understand these things and make better choices with regard to our training or our work days, or in whatever way that you can. For most athletes, the best form of stress management often is reducing in part some of the training to create time and space for that person. I think we've kind of established that, and definitely check back. We wrote a really nice blog on this in, I think it was like February or March, which kind of goes through those physical kind of manifestations of the fight or flight response and the sympathetic nervous system just being very active. A couple things we can do during the day. We can do some breathing. It's a little hippy dippy, like Zoe says, but it really works. An inhalation of 4 seconds, holding the breath for 7, and exhaling for 8 for 4 breaths. Perfect place to start. I always recommend to my athletes meditation. I find that is very, very helpful. And a lot of people who commit to it have benefits from that. And performance benefits too, not just in managing stress, but in better focus and things like that. And then where else did we go with the conversation?
That you can still achieve your potential while balancing a busy
Yeah,
life.
absolutely. Stress can be good. It can help you to stay motivated. It can help you to see where you need to go. It's an integral part of this process. It's all about recognizing it, working on managing it and using it to your advantage, knowing when to back off or to work with a coach to help you to back off when you need to. It's not about perfection. It's about progress. And every day we get a little bit better at understanding these things and how they work for us as individuals. Everybody's response to stress, their stress tolerance levels are very individual and different.
Yeah.
Respect where you're at today. You guys are all superstars and already really great at managing stress, or else you wouldn't have gotten this far.
Yeah.
Seriously. So give yourselves like a round of applause or a pat on the back. Just being involved with something like this means you're a good, stress manager.
And then it's okay when you have days where you're not very good at it.
Yeah, it
It
happens.
happens.
All right. This will be available on YouTube. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Yeah, we appreciate it. Don't forget, if you have training specific questions, you can email us or write on the Facebook page. We will dive into those things, whenever we get those kind of comments. If not, be here Friday. We'll chat about another topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or if you have a topic you want us to talk about within reason, we'd be willing to check it out. Cool. Good
Happy
work.
Monday.
See you guys. Bye.